Hello, everybody. Welcome back. So, in the last little video, we looked at Frank O'Hara's poem, and we did a close reading of this poem and spent quite a lot of time thinking about weather imagery and how it related to mood and emotions and affect and feelings and all that kind of stuff. And we constructed a kind of reading where the poem is maybe a sort of apology, an apology for being late, but the sort of apology that you get between people who know each other quite well, that's more to do with humor than with going through some kind of formal ritual. And we suggested also maybe perhaps that's actually a way of avoiding an apology. And that led into a discussion about what apologies are, concentrating on saying sorry for little things. And without being anti apology, we explored how apologies can carry psychological risks or costs, how the effort of reconciliation can be mixed up with feelings of guilt and shame. And perhaps we could say that apologies are socially constructed forms that are variable in different times and places and are different for different kinds of people. So, the possibility of an apology for someone who has a lot of power and privilege may just kind of be a license to do what you want. You can always say sorry afterwards. Whereas for others, for people experiencing certain types of subjugation, as Frank O'Hara, a gay poet in 1960s USA, certainly would have experienced, um, an apology can mean something kind of quite different. It might feel like something that society is trying endlessly to extract from you. And you might get the sense that no apology is ever going to be good enough, and that maybe different forms of interaction need to be explored to accomplish reconciliation and forgiveness. Um, and we could have talked more about forgiveness as well. We were kind of critical about the concept of an apology. Perhaps we could have also applied some of that critical thinking to the concept of forgiveness itself. But today we're going to move on and look at some more poems. And I'm going to talk a lot less in this video. I'm going to present a lot more poems. So I said that when we're doing a close reading, there's no kind of formula or recipe that you can follow that's going to work every single time for every single text. That said, if you are stuck, there are certain strategies that you might want to try early on as you're doing your reading. So here are some things that you might want to explore. First of all, do you understand all the words in the text? If there are any unfamiliar words, look them up. Even if a word is familiar but seems like it might be doing something special in this text, look it up. Are there any bits that just feel a bit more strange, weird, complicated? Separate the text into the bits that feel straightforward and the bits that feel like there might be something going on there that you don't yet understand. And of course, that's provisional. As time goes by, as you understand the poem more deeply, you may well be like, whoa, these bits that I thought were straightforward have actually got all kinds of questions just like fizzing and sprouting out of them. It's really useful to kind of identify figures of speech, especially metaphor and simile, early on. And this isn't just like a box ticking exercise, like, oh, I spotted a metaphor. It can be really useful to know that something is being invoked in a poem in a way that is metaphorical. So, for example, if you've built up this beautiful, great reading about a poem and the elephant that appears in it, and it's this poem about an elephant, and then kind of finally realize that actually it was talking about the elephant in the room. There isn't actually an elephant in the poem, or its presence in the poem is kind of a little bit more figurative and spectral. It would have been nice to have figured some of that stuff out earlier on. So you can start looking for places, scenes, people, things, objects. You can start looking for audiences. Often a poem is spoken by somebody and addressed to somebody, but kind of intended to be heard, to be overheard by some third party. You can think about the tone. Does the tone shift at any point? Think about, are there any moments of humor and how that humor is functioning? And similarly, sarcasm, irony, perhaps moments where the poem, in which the moments in which one voice is mimicking another, that can be very handy to spot early on. You can look at things like form, punctuation, the layout, rhyme, rhythm, meter, orthography, the capitalization. You can look at different registers. So, in other words, think about the vocabulary and think about what other contexts might you find those sorts of words in. Where would they be if they weren't in a poem? Is there kind of casual, conversational, everyday speech? Are there scientific terms, other technical terms like legal terms, medical terms? What do these words do in their spare time when they're not hanging out in this particular poem? And then I think something that can be really useful is to try and put the poem in your own words, to paraphrase the poem. And the reason that can be very useful is that it gives you a kind of text in your mind that you can compare the poem with and start noticing the differences. You can start discovering what has gone missing or what has transformed in your version of it, in your paraphrase of it. And that can help you to start identifying the things in the poem that maybe are unparaphrasable, that must necessarily be put in these particular words. So that may be kind of overly methodical for some of you. Some of you might not want to kind of go through a checklist, and you might prefer just to kind of discover your own ways of spending time with a poem and learning its secrets. But they're a good set of questions to begin with if you are stuck at all. Okay, so for the rest of this video, we're going to look at a selection of 12 poems, which I've chosen loosely because I feel they do have some connection to the things we've explored. So there's some poems about waiting for somebody, poems about apologies and non-apologies, poems about scarcity and abundance and thresholds and the themes of excess and moderation, some poems about that complicated public-private distinction, a distinction that is often, it can be real, it can be illusory, it's often not sophisticated and complex enough to capture whatever is really going on. And I've introduced as part of that a theme of domestic spaces. And these are really hopeful poems about utopian hope, many of them. They're also, most of them, some older ones have slipped in, but most of them are by contemporary poets and they've been written in the last couple of years. So for the rest of this video, you can just listen. I'll read them out loud. I won't say too much about them. If you want, you can pick a poem that interests you, pause the video and just try doing a close reading of that poem. If you want, you can kill the audio as well. So giving a reading of a poem is starting to interpret it, is starting to impose a certain interpretation on the text. And you may prefer just to try and close read some of these texts without my voice in your head. You may want to kill the audio and try it that way instead. It is up to you. Okay. So the first poem is by Rihaku, translated by Ezra Pound. And it's a poem about somebody who's waiting. It's a poem about somebody who has suffered a kind of injury emotionally. And I think it also maybe extends that theme that we touched on of how we often don't encounter our feelings by looking inward, but actually by looking outward. We see ourselves projected in the world around us. The River Merchant's Wife. While my hair was still cut straight across my forehead, I played about the front gate pulling flowers. You came by on bamboo stilts, playing horse. You walked about my seat, playing with blue plums. And we went on living in the village of Chakan, two small people without dislike or suspicion. At 14, I married, my lord, you. I never laughed, being bashful. Lowering my head, I looked at the wall. Called to 1,000 times, I never looked back. At 15, I stopped scowling. I desired my dust to be mingled with yours, forever and forever and forever. Why should I climb the lookout? At 16, you departed. You went into far Ku Tu Yen, by the river of swirling eddies, and you have been gone 5 months. The monkeys make sorrowful noise overhead. You dragged your feet when you went out. By the gate now, the moss is grown, the different mosses, too deep to clear them away. The leaves fall early this autumn in wind. The paired butterflies are already yellow with August over the grass in the west garden. They hurt me. I grow older. If you are coming down through the narrows of the river Kiang, please let me know beforehand, and I will come to meet you as far as Cho Fu Sa. So you could imagine that as a letter or perhaps as a wish. So you've probably seen many versions of this because this kind of became an internet meme. You've probably seen the original as well. It's by William Carlos Williams. This is just to say, I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me, they were delicious. So sweet and so cold. So you can maybe see a imagist influence here. I wonder if those final 2 lines could be thought of as a note on the poem itself, as though it was trying to give sweetness and coldness in return for sweetness and coldness. And I wonder if there is maybe faintly in the background of this poem that kind of tradition of often very misogynistic seduction poetry in which a lover is beseeching the beloved to set aside the rules, to say the rules don't really apply to us. And there's a kind of appeal to the sensuous and the voluptuous, and there is an appeal to the supposed mercy of the beloved to allow the lover to transgress in order to satiate their appetites. So something like Andrew Marvell's To His Coy Mistress might be an example of the sort of thing I'm talking about. Okay, so this is by Colin Hurd, another contemporary poet. So, you know, these poets, they're around, they're writing now. You can find their recent work. You can follow them on Instagram and Twitter. Colin Hurd most recently spotted in lockdown with his partner making videos of themselves literally climbing the walls. And this is a poem about... I picked this one, I think, because it has a moment of reconciliation. It has a sort of incident that could be considered to be an injury, but the poem chooses to frame it not as an injury. But the addressee, the person here, has kind of disappeared. They've whizzed away. So roughly speaking, I think what's happened is that the speaker's been walking along, a van has honked at him and yelled something, probably like nice jumper. And this is the poem that gets written in response. The van driver drives away. It could be interesting to think about this really intersectionally, to think in particular about class, about gender, about sexuality, and perhaps to some extent about race as well. Nice honk, van driver. Deep down, you know it's me. I'm all over this like a rash. I'm holding a little model of a van and you're inside it. Think I'm kidding? The jumper I'm wearing feels so alive. I feel like adding on a service charge for keeping me warm and zippy today. Your honk made my day, sweetheart, like a magazine rejection, which is secretly why I'm in this game. I just love being teased. And anyway, after this, I'll come home and my lamps metaxa copper as they warm up to illuminate a wardrobe in which I have a shirt with peaches all over it and a Keith Haring tracksuit. Honk at those, pretty please, with a watermelon on top. And I guess this little cluster of poets, yeah. So Caspar Heinemann, Leela Matsumoto, Sophie Robinson, Colin Hurd, all contemporary poets, Marion Morris as well, who, to some extent, I think probably at some point have been influenced or responded to Frank O'Hara and the New York School in their writing. But those influences have been mingled with millions of other influences in a kind of aromatherapy of influences, so that the tincture is perhaps ultimately so small. I don't know if it really is worth mentioning. And they all do have their own extremely kind of distinctive voices. So Hurt Face. I come home late like a man, like a stranger, zebra-headed and foreign, put my key in the door and keen and cry for all my flat old places, fall asleep on the keyboard and reblog the universe, fuck with my long sad dick, every last utensil, put on whiskey and strip in the garden, have a scratchy fight with next door's pets, eat and vom the flowers flowering on my face, the face of my stupidness today. Listen, I sing when I work, and I work all the time with lovely Wi-Fi and a sharp, clean Sharpie and my big girl knickers all in a twist around my throat. I have drawn you a face to wear, and it is my face, and it hurts me. But whatever now, you've come through the door and in your own face with your job and a bag full of food. Oh, bum! Oh, joy! Oh, bloated world! What dreams I am on the stairs of. So, a really rough, sketchy rudiments of a reading that you might want to disagree with. I think that, I think in the first stanza, somebody's coming home, she's coming home unhappily, messily drunk, and just kind of causing chaos and havoc with the domestic space. Every last utensil, that's what that kind of implies. Either they're already dirty, or maybe she somehow manages to use everything, trying to maybe make some food. But when we see put on and would expect some kind of food, we just find the word whiskey, or we might expect put on the kettle, and we just find whiskey. The environment is kind of chaotic and hallucinatory and phantasmagoric. Things don't quite cohere and make sense. That is the case temporally as well. That the timing of things doesn't quite make sense, or perhaps it does. So she seems to go inside, and then despite all this havoc that she's wreaking, she goes outside again for some reason to have a fight with next door's pets, possibly to have a cigarette. So in the midst of it all, she does remember, oh, okay, I don't smoke inside. And you start to wonder, maybe there's somebody else here. Maybe there's somebody who is sleeping or not sleeping, somebody who's been woken up. And maybe those same questions, those same possibilities are going through her head in the second stanza, which I think is a stanza partly about the difference between having a job and working all the time. And it asks, what work is. And it's partly, and this is one of the reasons I picked this poem, it's about waiting for someone and anticipating their mood, what kind of mood they're going to be in when they come through the door and what's going to happen. Um, she says, I've drawn you a face to wear. Then she says, and it is my face and it hurts me. I wonder what you think about that. So those are just some ideas maybe to get you started. Maybe you don't like those ideas and you'd like to start another way, or maybe you do like them and you'd like to see what you can elaborate them into. And this is another poem that's kind of about waiting for someone, and it's also kind of about that someone being a form of rescue or salvation. I've mentioned Ahara, but also in the background in this poem, you might see the Black Mountain School, and particularly you might also see Gertrude Stein. It's another domestic environment where things are unpredictable, estranged, a little bit monstrous, a little bit surreal. Sort of neat and discreet and sly poem in the sense that you might not notice all the weirdness the first time you read it through. So, pancake. Oh, the horror vacui of the crevice between refrigerator and wall. I call my reliable caulker, and she arrives after lunchtime with an armful of smooshable foodstuffs, eventually electing pancakes as her most preferred medium. So horror vacui is a term usually in art and architecture, which literally means, as you might guess, fear or horror of a vacuum, but also refers to a style which kind of fills every tiny little space with lots of intricate detail and decorations. So it's not clear if there's a kind of space between the refrigerator and the wall, or if maybe that space is already been kind of filled up with something really, really intricate. And then she goes ahead and calls her reliable caulker, who arrives after lunchtime. So I guess maybe the speaker they've already eaten. With well, you might expect a caulker to have like a caulking gun that's going to ooze some kind of silicone gel that can seal up spaces, cracks, and the seals and seams that appear throughout structures to make those structures watertight, to make sure that the damp and wet and rain and snow doesn't get in. She has arrived instead with an armful of smooshable foodstuffs, eventually electing pancakes as her most preferred medium. So do they eat pancakes? I'm not sure. Does she because literally what's kind of implied is that she fills the space between the fridge and the wall with pancake mix. Okay, so I think a lot of mysteries to explore, a lot of speculation that needs to be done and needs to be kind of elaborated and confirmed by close attention to the words on the page. But I'm talking too much, so let's move on. This is a slightly longer poem by Caspar Heinemann. And there's a lot going on in this longer poem. For what it's worth, the kind of links that I saw mainly appear towards the end of the poem, as you'll see. The head is a headless hunter. The pole star is not a star, but in fact a role to be played. So I sent in a CV to Orion. The best boss is a headless boss, with the photo of the inside of my eyelid, and an address. I live below, where the insides of the marshmallows are now vacuums they want, to build a road under Stonehenge. I'm praying for an ancient alien cargo cult curse to bring the whole fucking thing fucking crashing down to earth. Praise the sun, burn the sun. Bumblebees appear on the endangered species list. Good news becomes sterilized on contact with air. No risk. Career. Substitutes. Communism. Substitutes. Contentment. Substitutes. Nourishment. Substitutes. Nothing. Drinking ice cream, hot chocolate, despite the advice of my horoscope. Sorry, my nutritionist. Sorry, my brain chemistry, because my guts can digest dairy better than despair. Or they can't, but there's only one way to find out. What if it turns out my only real contribution to the discourse is purely social lubrication? I ask my imaginary friend's dog. whilst offering a shredded copy of The Revolution of Everyday Life as bedding. Everything Everyone Good star, including and especially the imaginary, gets crushed, a red flavour slushy of hopelessness. Articulation can't avoid the asterisk after good. Nothing is good. I became so zen last year. It doesn't matter what I feel when I say everyone good. I am saying everyone terrified of the sorting of people into good and not good. Full catastrophe living at the end of my fingertips. Mushrooms the cosmos. Post-snow sludge rotting roots. A future filled to spilling with quietly religious engineers. There is no happiness, but just about this handful of choco muesli washed down with golden milk to keep the fear moist and heavy, empty crumble. The edible biopolitical sphere, the palm oil milk chocolate world egg ate the toy inside to learn to be a social digestion capable entity. Of course I can read Helvetica. Exposure and response prevention therapy. I spill my guts. It's all gravy soaking into your absorbent bureaucracy. It is impossible to know how much of my creative process is aerosol fumes or throwing stones at the sans serif of the collective unconscious. Alien abduction fantasy roleplay. Stop using gendered pronouns for extraterrestrial life. Never trust a person without disgusting bodily habits. A shrine to their belly button fluff house full of menstrual blood-filled pot plant zombie fag end cigarettes. Have you no joy left to eat out of your nose? I think that bit there might have been more like at the sans serif of the collective unconscious alien abduction fantasy roleplay. I introduced a pause that I think maybe was a bad pause, but I don't know. See what you think about this poem. And let's move on. Here's a slightly older one by Denis Levertov. What my house would be like if it were a person. This person would be an animal. This animal would be large, at least as large as a workhorse. It would chew cud like cows, having several stomachs. No one could follow it into the dense brush to witness its mating habits. Hidden by fur, its sex would be hard to determine. Definitely it would discourage investigation. But it would be, if not teased, a kind, amiable animal, confiding as a chickadee. Its intelligence would be of a higher order, neither human nor animal, elvish, and it would purr, though of course, it being a house, you would sit in its lap, not it in yours. See what you think about that one. Well, it's a kind of a conceit, of an extended figure of speech where a house is compared to a person, but actually it's even more complicated than that because the person is then kind of transformed into this animal. I'm interested in particular in that little bit. What do you think about no one could follow it into the dense brush to witness its mating habits? So that's, I guess, how houses make more houses. Fluorine by Rita Wong. Arsenic in calculators, mercury in felt hats, mad as a poisoned hatter, pyrophoric undercurrent in mundane acts, assume poison unless otherwise informed, crowded alloys detect no health damage until generations later. I brush my teeth with nuclear intensity. The cavities I avoid destined for others fall into hazardous waste piles up as I sleep, smells, though I don't see it, transported across oceans and into sad rural neglect. How shiny my teeth are this cold, crisp morning. So this is a scene that is both domestic and intimate. It's somebody perhaps brushing their teeth in the morning, and also entirely global in its reach. So it's another kind of poem in which the domestic can become monstrous, phantasmagoric, strange, but it's interested in using that strangeness to think about the entanglement of the material reality of a domestic space with a much, much broader geographical span. Where do these materials come from? What are the flows of toxins that they are implicated in? What are the capital flows, the flows of value? who has worked, whose bodies have suffered damage, whose lives have been exploited and subjugated in order that this domestic environment be exactly the way it is. And I don't think this is a poem that's like about ethical consumption. I think it's a poem that is doing its best to think about the ways in which things are actually connected and making that its starting point. It's not interested primarily in liberal reproach of particular consumption habits or of the particular choices of individuals. It's interested in individual agency, but it's also very much interested in collectives and systems and systemic effects and what we might call slow violence. Okay. Craig Santos Perez, Love Poem in a Time of Climate Change, sonnet number 2. And it's another poem that links the intimate with the global. You could think about how it reinvents and reimagines the love sonnet for a time of climate change, for the Anthropocene. Is this what a love poem looks like during a time of climate change? Do the circumstances of climate change what love is itself? I think it's Margaret Atwood that says that another good term for climate change would be everything change. Sonnet 2. My love, I have crossed so many borders for a kiss, smuggled by strangers. I followed dream tracks in the desert where there's no spring, no mercy, only this mass migration towards your refuge. My love, I walked amongst labor, that global capital forgot, traversed bridges of bones, and witnessed populations collapse around me with the hope to become your citizen. My love, embrace my desperation, my day's labor. Touch me as if we've always been interwoven, from our cars all the way down to our cancers. And in that final couplet, you could think about the kind of interweaving and intermingling that we would see in love poems. For example, in the metaphysical poets, in a poem like John Donne's The Flea, and think about Stacey Alamo's concept of transcorporeality, the way materials move across the boundaries of bodies and other sorts of beings, the ways in which we are intermeshed and interwoven. And I think an interesting question to ask about this poem might be who the beloved is. Who is the my love that is addressed here? This is a poem by Marianne Morris, his silence poem. And I guess I chose this poem partly just because I really liked it. I found it kind of electrifyingly mysterious. It's a sort of poem that maybe doesn't necessarily ask to be liked. I also thought that it was resonant with some of the themes we were talking about in terms of coming to reconciliations, but not via the procedures of apology and forgiveness. So it's about perhaps processing past injuries, past harms that have been done. It has a kind of moment of affirmation of personal autonomy against masculinist, patriarchal value systems that will impose value and say, you know, what's valuable and what's not. It has that kind of moment in the earlier part, but it's far from straightforward. It goes all kinds of interesting, strange places afterwards, and I'm particularly intrigued by this image. I'm helpless to a certain sexual power that is half impotence and half my volition to choose it. There's something really interesting about this idea of being helpless. But the thing that is rendering you helpless is partly made up of your own volition, your own will, your own autonomy, perhaps. His silence poem. Just back from the past, it's not even a real place. I got lost there to undo that there ever was a man who knew better than I how I ought to write, and whether he was dead or alive, and whether we made love or not, and whether we were related or not, it doesn't matter. There is never a war alone. Now I've been alone. I'd prefer a war. Years and bodies all mine, and in every series one cautiously clapping abdominal set, right where I want you. It's true, I did once have my eye on the world. Now I'm the topless recipient of my own love. At least I know what I like. What if all fighting against is honing to points in which things as they are is, in essence, release? The pink rod in my back starts at the eye in my forehead. I can't close. It won't be ignored. Stars. They both blink. Into the bargain, I stretch my thighs, taut in tight shorts, and despise my proof of my love as an addiction to blowing and blows. I mean, I'm helpless to a certain sexual power that is half impotence and half my volition to choose it, and enthralled to lashing disappointments, unable to break them, can only stand to cope. You're a plate. I will break. You get to a point, you feel sure it's the end, but the curve to an end just perpetuates. And to others, it's freedom to sleep like this. Like I said, I'd prefer a war. I read one line a little bit wrong, I think, and despise proof of my love. What kind of war, I guess, would be maybe a good question to start with, and perhaps a question to come back to as you grow more familiar with this poem. And this is a poem by T.J. Dima called Woman Like You. And I think if we think back to where we were with Frank O'Hara and this kind of fabulous intelligence navigating the loopholes of a system of subjugation, if we want to think about that poem in that way, we've come a long way now. There are gestures here of solidarity and resistance and resilience, and there's a somewhat more overt critique of the kind of systemic violence that appeared much more obliquely in some of those earlier poems. Women like you. Hold the sharp end of a knife, bottles scattering in the wake of children and mourning life. This is the contract. To make in the shadows and in the light settle for things like breath and bread, while inside you clamor at the eyes of drunk men touching the young girl walking. As hunters would, your days will dig a trapping pit where you and she might emerge, your hands bloody with practice. There's a lot that's very interesting about this poem. The word contract there kind of recalls to me Carol Pateman's work on The Sexual Contract, her kind of famous feminist book, which critiques contractual relationships themselves. Most famously, their assumption that contracts can ever take place between equals within a patriarchal society. Okay, I think this is the final one. Revolutionary letter number 4, and again, this is a slightly older one. Left to themselves, people grow their hair. Left to themselves, they take off their shoes. Left to themselves, they make love, sleep easily, share blankets, dope and children. They are not lazy or afraid. They plant seeds, they smile, they speak to one another. The word coming into its own. Touch of love on the brain, the ear. We return with the sea, the tides. We return as often as leaves, as numerous as grass. Gentle, insistent, we remember the way our babes toddle barefoot through the cities of the universe. Okay, so that's just been a quick tour of some poems which have some very loose associations, but there's a set of kind of overlapping loose associations. There's not one big central theme, but I really just thought that there might be some poems that you might want to choose one from and think about and kind of practice some close readings. Um, and yeah, thanks very much. These are poems I like. Okay, see you later. Bye.